Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled End Times 444, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 4, The Role of Obedience and Faith in Heart Regulation. The podcast objectives are revisit why you should never focus on the problem, reveal when the way of escape is made, and reveal how righteousness helps you achieve heart regulation. When you focus on the problem. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome to day 276 of our exposition of lawlessness. In the most recent podcast, we began analyzing the role of righteousness in heart regulation. We concluded that podcast by revealing how the path of righteousness is not only the leading frame of the way of holiness, but it is also the way of escape. By definition, the way of escape is the path you must follow to succeed your tests, trials, and spiritual warfare. On each occasion, Yahuwah will empower you to endure the situation until the appointed time, in which he brings the event to a conclusion, allowing you to escape. Now, understanding this, we came to see how the enemy invests a great deal of time and effort in keeping us from finding the way of escape. Why? It's because the way of escape is our only path to victory. Ergo, the enemy, per the Father's allowance, will test you and he will try you. He will do his best to distract you with diverse temptations. He will attempt to use the false brothers and sisters in our midst to take away your peace and your joy. The list goes on. Whatever he thinks he can do to keep you from finding the way of escape, he will do. My dear friend, he will even throw the kitchen sink at you. Now, knowing this, we concluded the most recent podcast with the question of the hour, vis-a-vis understanding how there is no path to victory in your tests, trials, and spiritual warfare outside of the way of escape, and understanding how you will be bombarded with a vast array of spiritual assails every step of the way. How do you find the way of escape? Now, the answer is sure, but it's not nearly as simple as it is sure. Ergo, as it is my custom, I will lean heavily upon the Ruach of Elohim to guide me as I do his work. Savior divine, give me the wisdom to make this complex matter simple, to unite the hearts of your children with thine. Amen. Now, first things first, and this is a lesson I have taught you before. To wit, you should not focus on the enemy and his kitchen sink strategy. Quite the contrary, you should focus on Yahuwah and the fact that he will not allow Satan to destroy you. My dear friends, you must believe me. You may endure a great deal in your pursuit of the seal of Elohim and everlasting life. But you must always remember this. Whatever you don't allow to kill you will only make you stronger. That's the key, my friend, to it, knowing that the assaults of the enemy are not designed to kill you. The only way they can kill you is if you allow them to. For look, listen, it has been written, be sober, watch, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking someone he may devour. Look here, Peter is very clear. Satan is not just looking for anyone. Quite the contrary, he is only looking for someone whom he may devour. Why? It's because he's not strong enough to devour just anyone. Quite the contrary, he can only devour you if you let him. And he knows if you will let him because Satan is a watcher and he is watching you closely to see how you respond to his attacks, to wit, the temptations you have succumbed to in the past. And if he sees any indication that you are getting weak, he will turn up the pressure hard and fast. Here again, that's the problem. And even though this problem is real, you must remember your training. Brothers and sisters, you must remember all the things you have already learned in this podcast ministry, which is why I advise you to take notes. Not only this, but I also advise you to refer back to prior podcasts as you are led by the Spirit. And if you have trouble recalling any of the material, call upon the Ruach of Elohim, and he will bring all things to your remembrance. Now, along these lines, in End Times 394, Reigning Over Disobedience and Doubt, Part 4, which was posted on December 27th, 2024, I revealed why you should always focus on the solution and not the problem. It is for the following reason above all others. When you focus on the problem and not the solution, you are not focusing on the way of escape. Ergo, when you focus on the problem, you are right where Satan wants you. To wit, you are on the outskirts of the Father's will. And with a little pushing and a little prodding, you will indeed fall, and he will go for the kill. Every time we enter a spiritual battlefield. Now, that being said, it is imperative that we focus on the solution. And to our great fortune, we discussed a key aspect of the solution in the same podcast in which we analyze why the solution should be our focus. In End Times 394, Reigning Over Disobedience and Doubt, Part 4, we analyze the helmet of salvation, vis-a-vis the piece of your spiritual armor you unlock via your mastery of obedience. In that podcast, I shared a crucial revelation, which I will offer now as an inflection point. Consider this. The helmet of salvation is not only designed to guard your mind in spiritual warfare, quite the contrary, it is also designed to communicate the strategy for the battle and the way of escape. Along these lines, the key to finding the way of escape is by taking the helmet of salvation and being obedient in all things. My dear friends, this is precisely why the outcome of every battle is determined prior to the battle. To wit, the only reason you would fail to find the way of escape is if you were not walking in obedient faith to the Father's will prior to the battle. And this is something you will always know prior to the battle. My dear friends, this is yet another witness to the power of the linear model of holiness. To wit, we will never walk in the path of righteousness, and we will never find the way of escape if we are not obedient in all things. 1 Corinthians 10:13 is revealing, no trial has overtaken you except such as is common to man. And Elohim is trustworthy, who shall not allow you to be tried beyond what you are able. But with the trial shall also make the way of escape, enabling you to bear it. Now, here lies a crucial revelation that I have alluded to in the past, and now I will offer it to you formally. This is one you should bookmark, for it validates the role of obedience in your ability to find the way of escape, and it reveals why no such path exists outside of obedience. At the commencement of any spiritual battle, there is no way of escape. To wit, the path does not exist. Not only this, but the path will never exist if we do not have the faith to endure the tests, trials, conflicts, and temptations associated with our quest. Ergo, we are forced to exhibit great faith in Elohim in every situation. And we must take also the helmet of salvation every time we enter a spiritual battlefield. Now, even though this may not be common knowledge, I assure you it is true. And to our good fortune, we've already established many of the pieces that will help us put together this complex puzzle. My ask is that you stay with me and allow the Ruach, his time and space, to piece this complex matter together. And I promise he will piece this complex matter together. And in the end, I will tie this all back to the prime objective of achieving heart regulation. 2 tracks of wisdom. Now, first things first, I want you to consider your own life and ask yourself the following question. How many times have I endured a test, trial, or spiritual battle, and I knew how every phase would develop and how the conflict would end? Unless Yahuwah had a reason to give you this advanced knowledge, our realities are all the same. We don't know what to expect at the commencement of any conflict. And yet, we are more than willing to endure the conflict because of our great faith in Elohim. Now, here is a question I have for this audience, and this is one you should know. What is the primary application and affliction of faith? If your answer is obedience, you're right. Obedience is the primary application and affliction of faith. Ergo, where there is no obedience, there can be no faith. Facts. Along these lines, the fundamental degree of obedience is compliance. And so, here is the next question. What is the primary illustration of compliance? If you answered an elastic suit, you're right. The primary illustration of compliance is an elastic suit. Well done. Along these lines, the great work of compliance is to prepare us for the ensuing work of conformance, i.e., the focal degree of obedience. And what, my dear friends, is the primary illustration of conformance? If you answered a railway system, you're right. Look here, the primary illustration of conformance in our quest is a railway system. Enter the railway of conformance, an illustration of spiritual infrastructure that is designed to achieve 2 primary objectives. Vis-a-vis, it is designed, A, to prevent us from falling out of the way of holiness, and B, to prevent anything contrary to the Father's will from migrating onto our path. This brings us to transformation, i.e., the critical degree of obedience. If you recall, transformation is designed to assimilate us into the spiritual model of Yahushua Messiah as we walk in the way of holiness. And this is a task we can only achieve if we are at all times walking in compliance and conformance. Now, these are the pieces we chiefly need, and thus we are ready to begin building this puzzle. To begin with, you should consider how we initiated our lessons on virtue with a laser focus on power. Why? It's because virtue is the focal power of the Ruach of Elohim. Ergo, virtue is the first level within the pinnacle of holiness where we begin to really operate in the power of the Ruach. And thus, we were also led to increase our focus on spiritual warfare. Now, as it pertains to spiritual warfare, we understand that the way of escape is the only path to victory. Not only this, but the way of escape can only be found within the path of righteousness. And what do we know about righteousness? My dear friends, per the linear model of holiness, we understand that righteousness is the primary application of conformance. Ergo, where there is no conformance, there can be no righteousness. Brothers and sisters, here lies a crucial revelation, and the first piece to this complex puzzle we must piece together. Consider this and be edified. As righteousness is the primary application of conformance, the railway of conformance is the boundary of the path of righteousness. Now, this revelation unlocks two tracks of wisdom. First and foremost, it reveals that we will never find the way of escape or succeed in spiritual warfare if we are not walking in conformance to all the rules of holiness. It was a non-starter when we first touched on this topic, and it remains a non-starter until now. Next, the second track reveals that the path of righteousness, like the way of escape, does not appear at the outset of any test, trial, or spiritual battle. The reason why is sure, and we shared it during our lessons on obedience. If you didn't bookmark it then, I advise you to bookmark it now. The railing system of conformance is dynamic. Vis-a-vis, it is activated and formed as we walk in compliance to the standards of the Father's will. Ergo, the moment you stop walking in compliance is the moment you will notice your railing system becoming obsolete and disconnected. And when you look again, the entire structure will be gone. My dear friends, I truly hope you are getting this because the Ruach is at work. Look here, for here lies the connection. The way of escape and the path of righteousness are evolutions of the railway of conformance. Ergo, if we fail to activate the railway of conformance by walking in compliance, there will be no path of righteousness for us to travel. There will be no way of escape. And if you're wondering why, I'll tell you in the form of an inflection point. The Father's will is the most secure and safest space in every sphere of existence, namely on this earth. Ergo, every path we can take that is aligned with the Father's will must also be secure. It must be safe. To wit, it must possess the spiritual infrastructure, i.e., railing, to guard those who are in the way. Ergo, our unique path of righteousness and the corresponding way of escape cannot be formed until the railing system of conformance is in place. Not only this, but we have also established that conformance is an evolution of compliance. This is why the railway of conformance is activated and formed as we walk in compliance with the standards of the Father's will. And what do we know about compliance? Vis-a-vis, compliance is the elastic suit of holiness. It is the spiritual clothing we put on at the beginning of our quest, and we never take it off. Here lies another revelation the Ruach has given me to share. Receive it, my friends, and live. As compliance is the first vertical step we take in our quest, every model of spiritual clothing we wear evolves from the elastic suit of compliance. That includes the whole armor of Elohim. Ergo, if you are not walking in compliance, you are going into spiritual warfare without any armor. My dear friends, now we are getting someplace. To wit, the helmet of salvation, which we unlock via our mastery of obedience, is an evolution of the elastic suit of compliance. Look here, this speaks to the foundational role of compliance in spiritual warfare. Remember, the helmet of salvation reveals the way of escape, and the helmet of salvation is established upon compliance. Now, what else do we know about compliance? As you have learned in prior podcasts, the great work of compliance is to align our plans with the Father's plans. Here is why this is so important in laying a foundation for you to find the way of escape. As we cannot perceive the way of escape at the outset of any test, trial, or spiritual battle, the first step we must take to make a way is to ensure our plans are always aligned with the Father's plans and his vision for our life. If they are, then we will take the next step and walk in conformance, which is designed to align our execution with the Father's will. And lo, this alignment positions us to be transformed in accordance with the Father's will. And as transformation can only occur within the path of righteousness, this, my friends, is how you will find the way of escape. It is because the helmet of salvation will communicate the way to you as you are being transformed. And you will find it for the simple but sure fact that you have mastered all the degrees of obedience and faith. Now, we talked about compliance and conformance in this development. Allow me to briefly address the role of transformation. Vis-a-vis, the primary illustration of transformation is a spiritual converter. If you recall, the primary objective of transformation is to provide us with a complete picture of the Father's will, so that we always know the next step we must take in our assimilation to the spiritual model of Yahushua Messiah. Here lies the inflection and the connection. Consider this. As every spiritual season in your life is highlighted by a series of spiritual conflicts, and the only way to succeed these conflicts is by finding the way of escape. Every step you take in your quest is designed to reveal to you the way of escape so that you pass every test and trial, and so you are victorious in spiritual warfare. My dear friends, every step you take in your quest for holiness is designed to transform you into a man or woman who has the power to overcome all things. Now, let's tie the sum of these matters back to the role of righteousness in heart regulation. Along these lines, righteousness is established upon all the degrees of obedience and faith we have just reviewed. And for the sake of time, I didn't even touch on the degrees of faith at the detailed level, i.e., hope, trust, and reliance. And yet, the connection is sure. Vis a vis, obedience and faith are fixtures within our mind. To wit, they help us achieve mind regulation the same way virtue helps us achieve heart regulation. And what do we know about mind regulation? Vis a vis, mind regulation is the beginning of heart regulation. Ergo, if our minds are not regulated, our hearts don't have a chance, which begs the question, how does the former position you to achieve the latter? The answer is sure. It is because the mind and the heart are connected. In this order, the thoughts within our minds are transferred into our hearts where they become intentions. Now, this brings us to the question of the hour. And if you answer it correctly, you have my highest respects. The question: how are the heart and mind connected at the detailed level? To wit, how do thoughts formed within your mind enter your heart? The answer is sure, via your thought alignment centers. You can see this by observing the image to the right, vis-a-vis the large green and blue circles that feed into your DPU. Now, look a little closer, and what do you see feeding into your thought alignment centers? Exactly. You see righteousness, and here lies the connection. To wit, righteousness is situated at the intersection between your heart and your mind. This is why obedience and faith, which regulate your mind, are so vital in regulating your heart. And this, my friends, is why Yahuwah led me to invest several podcasts teaching you the ins and outs of our minds and our hearts. Trust me, it wasn't to pass the time by overloading you with surplus knowledge. Quite the contrary, it is because you will never master the lines and precepts of holiness if you don't understand how they are designed to transform the various facets of our beings. Now, along these lines, we have used the in-depth studies of our hearts and our minds to see how righteousness builds off the great work of obedience and faith to achieve the greatest work in regulating our hearts. And as amazing as this work is, and as blessed as we are for Yahuwah to impart unto us this knowledge, I would yet remind you that these are only 2 tracks of wisdom. Trust me, there are 10,000s more. Ergo, I encourage you to stay with me, for we are still seeking the seal of Elohim. So we are guarded in these last days and remain in his presence. For once and forever, time is of the essence, always of the essence. Now, here is the final word. Every step you take within this quest will empower you to pass each test. My dear friends, I truly hope you are seeing this. I pray sincerely that the Ruach has opened your eyes to the progressive and evolutionary nature of this quest. Brothers and sisters, you must believe me. This is the primary reason why so many within this nation will never be saved. It is because they don't appreciate the progressive nature of our salvation. Quite the contrary, they have been deceived into believing one of the many variations of eternal security, a satanic doctrine which deceives many into believing they will receive the prize at the end of the race without running the race. What blasphemy! What foolishness! What madness and burning insanity! Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, not only is there no scriptural precedent for Yahuwah rewarding the slothful and wicked servants, it's not even spiritually sound. And yet, the spiritually indolent have staked their eternal fortunes on a doctrine which presumes Yahuwah will do something that he already said he would never do. To wit, he will never change, especially to cater to the defiled nature of the unclean and fools. Heretofore, I recommend, don't be deceived. Yahuwah is not mocked. For whatever a man is sowing, that shall he also reap. For this is just and fair. So take my advice and keep sowing. Don't give up. Keep going. And always remember, what got you here won't get you there. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on the word you have heard today. And as always, ask the Father to reveal the truth to you. For the children of Elohim live by conviction. And if he has not convicted you, or if you had not heard him concerning these matters, you should pray until you do. Today, I want you to meditate on the word I have shared. There are many crucial matters we covered, and so that is the only assignment for today. Consider these matters and be watchful as you pray. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, End Times 444, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 4. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 445, Reigning Over Contempt, Part 5. I will post this podcast on Friday, April 4th, 2025. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim. Continue to watch. Continue to pray. Continue in fasting. And most of all, continue to be focused. For the end is coming. The end is near.